Well, gracious greetings, Saints, D.Min family and guests. Welcome to another edition of Living Water for a Thirsty Thursday. Another beautiful Southern California day. We want to continue and prayerfully put a bow around this subject of excuses. And if you remember, we said today we want to talk about those excuses that we said, I didn't know, right? And so does ignorance give us a pass for excuses? We kind of already alluded to it, that we know that even though we give it an excuse, obviously it doesn't take away whatever was done or was not done that someone else expected. But let's speak about it from the perspective of God himself. And the scripture that I want to read comes from Leviticus, the 4th chapter, starting at the 1st verse. It says, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a person shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which he ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them. And I won't read through all of that. It then gives different things for the priest to do in order to have that soul's sin of ignorance, whatever they did or did not do because of ignorance, it still has to have an offering, right? That sin debt still has to be paid. We're still held accountable and responsible for those sins. So also wanted to read in verse 13 of chapter 4, it says, And if the whole congregation, meaning all of Israel, sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning the things which should not be done, and are guilty, when the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the congregation shall offer a young bullock for the sin and bring him before the tabernacle of the congregation. And so the point being that ignorance is still not an excuse. IDK does not give a pass, nor does it give a pass with people. We should all be very careful with excuses. None of us are really looking to hear excuses when something isn't done. There is a time, like we talked about last week, when we're still trying to decide between guilt or innocence. But then once we're guilty, the best thing to do is just to own it, to receive it, and actually to say there was no excuse. You know, I should have done or I should not have done, whatever the case may be, and then press forward. And then more importantly, let's look at and let's work through prevention. What can keep us from doing this again? Where they say an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And so just putting a little bit more effort into prevention keeps us from having to put a whole lot more effort into cure, right? Because it's hard to get trust back when you lose trust. It's hard to get respect back when you lose respect. It's hard to get responsibility back when someone gives you responsibility, you know, all of those things. So really working towards prevention is far more important. So the excuses, whether it is fear or power or I didn't know or deflection or all of those things that we come up with the excuses for, the best thing in the moment is just simply say, there is no excuse, right? And then do what we can to prevent it from repeating itself. That's with God himself. Again, he said, let the dead bury the dead, as we have studied. And then we remember the story about the talents that God said, listen, you could at least just put it in the bank and I would have gotten interest, but you did nothing. There's no excuse, right? And so what ends up happening is what they had was taken away from them and given to someone else. So it's important that we really get past the excuses. Well, tune in next week. We're going to move on over to a different subject that's kind of, in some ways, a kissing cousin to excuses sometimes, unfortunately. And we want to talk about lying or liars. Because I tell a lie, does that mean I'm a liar? Or do I tell lies because I'm a liar? Yeah, we'll jump into that a little bit as well. Nonetheless, prayerfully, this has helped you on the journey to deal with excuses. Continue to make God proud in all you say and think.